welcome back to the Muslim Street. That is the sound of Miss Latifa. She is a LA native and now records out of Atlanta. She is really well known as a spoken word artist, but she has adventured into the world of hip hop and R&B. She is very well known in the scene as a very conservative and strong-willed Muslim woman. She does wear the hijab, the scarf, and a lot of that influence from her deen, from her religion, comes out in her spoken word poetry, in her music, and her rap. And she's really, really well known for her modesty and her soulful presentation. So definitely check her out. Her name is Miss Latifa. She has some beautiful spoken word to offer. And she kind of hasn't been around on the scene for the past year. She delivered a baby boy last year, and she's kind of been taking a break from that. But I want to go ahead and introduce Hassan to the show, Malik, and we'll take it from there.
We have with us attorney Hassan Shibly. He is the executive director of CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations here in Tampa. Welcome to the Muslim Street, Hassan. Welcome back to the Muslim Street.
Thanks. It's good to be back.
Awesome. Just want to kind of start at the National Defense Authorization Act, which was surreptitiously signed by the president while everybody was watching the ball drop. on New Year's Eve. Can you talk a little bit about where we're at with that?
Well, it's amazing. I mean, Obama signed it, and while he signed it, he also issued some interesting statements expressing his concern about the language in the act, which potentially allows our government to indefinitely detain U.S. citizens without any trial. And he gave us some sort of assurance, or so he would wish us to believe, that saying, well, my administration will not do that. My administration will not indefinitely detain United States citizens without due process of law. However, what's the guarantee that the next administration or the administration after that won't do it? I mean, I'm very concerned because I feel this was one step closer to the death of America as we know it, to the death of the nation, which was founded on principles that our government cannot detain its people without due process of law.
Yeah.
And it's up to us as a people to say, hey, this is not what our country stands for. And there is some hope, Malik. There is the Due Process Guarantee Act, which should be coming up soon, which basically makes it very clear, explicitly clear in the language that you cannot detain U.S. citizens, as our Constitution basically says you cannot detain U.S. citizens without due process of law indefinitely.
There's an interesting update on all of that. Chris Hedges, who's a very well-known journalist, he's been around the world. He's covered from many war-torn countries. He's worked for NPR, the New York Times, the Christian Science Monitor, and he's kind of really well-known for taking the last couple years of his career and focusing on things that bothered him a lot as he was around the world. Things like the in-depth focuses of why countries occupy other countries. He's become a very well-known progressive voice, and him and his attorneys have filed a lawsuit against the president. You want to tell us about that?
Yeah, excellent. I mean, that's a very important step because really in a democracy, it's up to the courts to be impartial and to be the vanguards of our freedoms, to put the Constitution, to put our rule of law above the politics of the day, above partisanship. And hopefully, these judges do their job. And I think the lawsuit seems to have a very strong case. Is that this the language that was in this bill is unconstitutional? It throws out the basic freedoms that make this country so great, and it's up to the courts to strike it down. And it's been up to the courts, really. I mean, the courts have a duty to uphold the Constitution, and the minute they put partisanship, the minute they put the politics of the day above the Constitution is the day we burn the Constitution, essentially.
I want to read a quote from Hedges. He did issue an explanation. He published an explanation as to why he is suing the president on the National Defense Authorization Act. And he says in his words, "I spent many years in countries where the military had the power to arrest and detain citizens without charge. I have been in some of these jails. I have friends and colleagues who have disappeared into military gulags. I know the consequences of granting sweeping and unrestricted policing power to the armed forces of any nation. And while my battle may be quixotic, it is one that has to be fought if we are to have any hope of pulling this country back from corporate fascism."
Well, I really hope his lawsuit helps America wake up. All right, we need to wake up as a people. We need to recognize that the freedom we have in this country, the freedoms protected in this Constitution are really, really great, and they're rare. Most countries do not have the democratic protections, the rule of law that we have. And if we don't wake up and say, hey, draw the line, and not allow our politicians to take away these rights for the sake of their political expediency, we're gonna regret it.
A couple of groups I'm concerned about is red flags. One is the activist group, and that's activism on any side of the coin. The second group, obviously, I'm concerned about is Muslims because of the what I perceive is an attack on Muslims since 1990 in this country. We have seen activism from a covert perspective in this country. The FBI, under the COINTELPRO, they used in the 1950s and 1960s heavy surveillance on organizations. They arrested and leaders. They infiltrated organizations. They arrested and detained leaders for years and years and years on false charges. The case of Geronimo Pratt, the case of Sundiata Kohli, the case of Daroba bin Wahad. They spent decades in jail. Now, all that was done under the table is basically in an open now. They have a license to do it now. And I mean, the American people across the board, because us today, you tomorrow.
Exactly. I mean, it'll be amazing to find out what kind of covert operations are going on right under our nose that we won't find out to 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now. And I think people will be outraged then.
Yeah.
But it's up to us right now to stand up for democracy, to stand up for our freedoms, and monitor our government. I mean, governments naturally tend to go into the direction of becoming dictatorships. You know, all the great democracies in history, most of them fell, and this is how they fell: 1 year at a time, one day at a time, one law at a time. The leaders chipped away at the freedoms and the protections that made this country so great, so they could assert more power. The elite want more power.
And I think what was surprising most people in this country is that Barack Obama perceived progressive to be the one that lays the hammer down on an issue like this is just incredible. Either the electorate read him wrong, or he has flipped the script. What do you say about that?
Well, I think they wanted somebody like Obama. They wanted somebody who outwardly appears as a progressive to be able to pass this bill, because I don't think we would have very easily gotten this bill passed under Bush, because people knew what Bush was about and they were very scared of his. I mean, look at the book he's going around the country promoting, where he basically boasts of authorizing torture. And you had leadership in Europe saying, hey, if you come into Europe, we're going to arrest you because you're basically boasting about violating the Convention Against Torture.
Yeah, the Geneva Convention.
But when it comes to Obama, well, people are more comfortable with him, so they're more relaxed with him. Again, chipping away at our freedoms, you know, because we're giving them someone they're more comfortable with. But we fail to realize that the next person may not be so nice, quote unquote.
And I know Ron Paul has sponsored a bill to at least repeal that section of the NDAA. Any other noise, Laila, coming out of Congress?
Well, there's a lot of noise coming out of Congress, or maybe lack thereof of noise. But as we discussed the National Defense Authorization Act and kind of the willingness of the constituency, I would say. I mean, of course, there is blame to the representatives, there is blame to the politicians at hand here, but of course there is blame to the constituency that kind of lets these things fly without accountability. What we're seeing is in Florida, you know, there's these very controversial laws that were passed to the changes of the Voter Act. And unlike the unlike the National Defense Authorization Act, coming up this Friday, we're going to see a very interesting first congressional investigation into these new voting laws. And basically the situation is in Florida is during the 1960s, the 1965 Voter Act law, 5 counties in Florida lost their right to kind of create their own voting laws, lost that right due to the Jim Crow laws, due to those decades of problem and conflict and racial segregation and racial kind of lighted fuel at what happens during voting. These 5 counties, because there was a change to the laws in voting during the last session last year in Florida, these 5 counties now have to go and get these laws changed by the federal government. We're going to see this first congressional hearing this Friday. It'll be in Tampa. A lot of things are coming up in Tampa right now. It'll be in Tampa. The hearing is by the U.S. Senate's Judiciary Subcommittee, and it's on the Constitution and Civil Rights. And we're going to be hearing a lot of testimony from community organizers, from these third-party voter registration organizations, of their conflict with these voting laws, and as well as Senator Bill Nelson, who has vehemently come against these laws, and they've become known as the voter suppression laws of 2011 for Florida. So this is definitely something to look into.
Yeah, you'll be testifying there?
I will be.
Awesome.
I will be testifying there on the voter laws and the changes and how these voter laws will affect and kind of suppress the vote.
And
Politicians that did presented it in the name of kind of trying to decrease voter fraud, but that's
voter
the cover
fraud.
there.
25% of African Americans in this country don't have a photo ID. Just don't have it, and they're requiring photo identification as a prelim to vote. I mean, so this is obviously directed again at the people who are pushing it, and that's the Republicans. We saw in the election of Bush v. Gore in 2000, who was heading the state at the time, the governor. It was Jeb Bush. He had the attorney general just run off the rolls. Over 100,000 African-American voters. And we saw, 500 votes or more shift that whole election. These are some serious games that they're playing.
Well, I think what the problem is, we take the fact that we are a democracy for granted and just assume that one vote, one person is all equal. Unfortunately, our country has a tradition of gerrymandering.
Yeah.
And that is you take, for example, the black population there and you divide it. So even though it's the majority in a particular city, you dilute the black vote and you remap it so that their vote is split up and it's they cannot vote together and they're split up and they're weak and thus their vote doesn't count. And that's something we really have to be concerned about, especially here in Florida. Thank God those amendments passed, I believe it was last year, correct, to fix the issue.
The irony of it all is we have these voting laws, the changes to the voting laws. We have redistricting that happened, and we have the 2012 presidential campaign coming up. So just if you bring this all together, you'll see that there is a hidden agenda here.
Absolutely.
We'll continue this discussion right after the commercial break. Again, you're listening to The Muslim Street on WTAN 1340.